At least 3 murders, a number of suspicious marriages with husbands that seemed to commit suicide, along with theft, fraud over decades, all characterize Louisiana-born Louisa Peete's life, not to mention various aliases she assumed along the way as she wreaked havoc with the men she encountered across numerous states. Born Loffie Presler in 1883, she was more commonly known as Louise and came from a prominent and wealthy newspaper family, going to a private school in New Orleans, from where she was expelled at the age of 15 for stealing from her classmates and promiscuous behaviour. By 1903, she was married to a travelling salesman called Henry Bosley and went on the road with him. He committed suicide by shooting himself in the head 4 years later, after discovering his wife in bed with another man. Now widowed, Louise sold what belongings he had and bought a bus ticket to Shreveport, where she worked as a high-class prostitute, specializing in house calls. She became popular with her wealthy clients, and at their homes she pilfered jewelry from the absent wives, selling off the pieces that she did not choose to keep herself to supplement her income. In time, she pushed her luck too far and was found out. Threatened with exposure of what she had been up to, she rapidly left and travelled to Waco in Texas. Setting herself up in town, it was not long before she became involved with wealthy wildcat oilman Joe Appel, well known for his diamond-encrusted rings and belt buckle. Even his shirt and jacket buttons were covered. 1 week after the two met, he was found shot through the head and his diamond jewellery missing. Louise was immediately arrested for his murder, claiming that she killed him in self-defence, she maintained, when he tried to rape her, and the case went to trial. When the jury heard of her account of her valiant fight to the death for her honour, they acquitted her, and then they applauded. Everyone seemed to have forgotten about the missing diamonds. By 1911, Louise had finally made her way to Boston, changing her name to Louise Gould. She claimed she was a 19-year-old Dallas heiress named R.H. Rosley. As Rosley, she falsely claimed that she had been confined to a convent by her family and had run away. She ingratiated herself into several wealthy Boston families with her beauty and charm, and managed to convince one of them to take her in. She then proceeded to charge items to the family at some of the city's most expensive stores and stole money from their friends and employees. After her true identity was discovered, police allowed her to leave town to avoid embarrassing the family. Running out of cash, she turned up in Dallas in 1913 and soon had married Henry Faroot, a night clerk who worked at the St. George Hotel. The union was mainly for her convenience. Soon after the two married, she stole $20,000 worth of jewels from the hotel's safe. Police questioned Faroot, but cleared him of any involvement. Suspecting Louise of the theft, the police questioned her, but had no evidence linking her to the crime. Embarrassed about being accused of theft, and despondent over his wife's infidelities, Faroot shot himself in the hotel basement. It is possible that he did not die by his own hand, and may have been another of his wife's victims. She was now a widow for the second time. 2 years later, in 1915, Louise had relocated to Denver, where she married salesman Richard Peete. They had a daughter called Betty in 1916. The couple argued constantly, as Louise's husband only made a meagre income, which did not live up to her standards, and finally they both separated in the summer of 1920. Louise left her husband and daughter and moved to Los Angeles, and while looking for a place to live, met Jacob Denton, a recent widower with a teenage daughter who had made millions as a mining engineer before retiring. When she met, whose large house was at 675 South Catalina Street, near Wilshire Boulevard, Denton hoped to rent his home out for $350 a month while he went on a business trip in June. He was the answer to her housing dilemma and possibly cash flow problems as well. Denton was a widower, having lost both his wife and one of his children in a recent flu epidemic. For unknown reasons, he agreed to allow Louise to rent the mansion for $75 a month, and she moved in on May the 26th, a few days before Denton's planned departure. She had asked Denton to marry her, but he had refused. The true nature of their relationship is unclear, but she may have been his live-in girlfriend, housekeeper, and tenant, despite the fact that she never signed her lease. The caretaker was asked to dump a load of earth into the basement of the home they shared, because, Louise said, she planned to grow mushrooms. Denton disappeared on the 30th of May, 1920. 3 days later, Louise forged Denton's signature to withdraw $300 from his bank account and to gain access to his safe deposit box. When a bank official noticed the signature looked unusual, she claimed that his right arm had been amputated after it was cut off by an angry, mysterious Spanish-looking woman with a sword, whom he had got into an argument with. An unlikely story. But people who inquired after Denton actually believed it, being told that he is recuperating in private. In the weeks that followed, Denton's friends, business associates and neighbours began asking Louise to reveal his whereabouts. She gave several stories to explain his absence, including that he was on an extended business trip and would return shortly. Meanwhile, she began posing as Denton's wife, spending his money, driving his Cadillac, pawning his possessions, and rented rooms out in his mansion, pocketing the money. She also convinced tenants of Denton's rental properties in Phoenix to make their rent checks out to her. In August, she charged 2 expensive dresses at Bullock's department store in Denton's name, still claiming to be his wife. The following month, having rented the mansion out, she returned to her estranged husband in Denver. After a few months had elapsed, Denton's teenage daughter hired lawyer Rush Blodgett in an effort to find her father. The lawyer questioned Louise, who claimed she did not know where Denton was, but agreed to forward his financial and business documents as soon as possible, and offered no further reasonable explanation as to Denton's absence. With Louise out of the house, Denton's daughter was finally able to have the premises searched. On the 30th of September, with Private Detective A.J. Cody, who had been hired by the lawyer, they both searched the home and found Denton's decomposing body buried under the soil in the basement. An autopsy determined that all his 4 limbs were intact and he had been strangled and shot in the head. His body was tied with numerous cords and wrapped in a quilt. Officers had a few questions for Louise, but she was nowhere to be found. Police tracked her down and questioned her about Denton's murder. She maintained that she was not involved, but offered different scenarios to explain his death, which were quickly dismissed, as Denton's body had been found with his right arm still attached, despite their claim that he was in hiding because he was embarrassed about his missing arm, and then claiming that the body was not even Denton. Returned back to Los Angeles, she was charged with first-degree murder. The trial began on the 21st of January 1921 and was extensively followed by newspapers nationwide. Thousands of spectators lined up daily to watch the accused walk into the Hall of Justice. The district attorney didn't believe a word of Louise's story, and she was hard-pressed to explain the silver and furs belonging to Denton that had been discovered in her possession. She also found it difficult to explain why she had purchased clothes under the name of Mrs. Denton prior to her departure from Los Angeles. The gun responsible for the fatal wound was found in a cupboard where her personal belongings were kept. She was convicted of the murder of Denton on the 8th of February, and the all-male jury recommended a life sentence instead of death. Throughout, and during the first 2 years of her sentence, her husband Richard Peete remained steadfastly loyal and continued to believe she was innocent. In 1923, she told him that he should divorce her so he would be free to remarry. He obliged, but vowed that he would wait forever for her release. Soon after the divorce was finalized, Louise stopped answering his letters and refused to see him. Depressed over her rejection and the shame he felt this had brought to his reputation, Peete shot himself in a Tucson hotel in 1924. With barely a hint of concern, Louise contacted the Arizona authorities, asking them to contact her deceased husband's Denver relatives to make burial arrangements. Louise was considered a model prisoner during her incarceration in the California Institution for Women in Tallahassee, having been transferred from San Quentin in 1933. 6 years later, on her 10th attempt to win parole, having served 18 years, she was paroled for good behaviour and was freed on the 11th of April 1939. The story does not end here, as she was released into the custody of 60-year-old Jessie Marcy in Los Angeles, a woman who had lobbied for her release and began working as her live-in housekeeper. Louise had changed her name again, this time legally, to Anna Lee. Marcy died of natural causes shortly after. She faded into obscurity, and nothing was heard of her for 5 years, until she moved in with her previous probation officer, Emily Latham, who was 70, who had helped her with the parole applications. Louise acted as her nurse and housekeeper, with Latham reporting regular updates to the parole office. In the summer of 1943, Latham became ill, and 2 weeks later died of a stroke. When she left, Louise took away a .32 caliber pistol that had belonged to Latham's dead husband. Neither this death or the one of Jessie Marcy was investigated at length, and the police were completely unaware that Louise was the subject of a previously publicised murder case or was on parole. After Latham's death, Louise moved in with Arthur and Margaret Logan, an elderly couple who lived in Pacific Palisades, as they had struck up a friendship while she was in prison. Margaret, a retired social worker, had believed that Louise was innocent since 1921 and had lobbied for her release, gladly signing monthly parole reports. The Logans had also cared for Louise's daughter while she was in prison. Louise worked for the couple as a live-in housekeeper and nurse to Arthur, who was suffering from dementia and had been declared mentally incompetent. Come early May 1944, Louise had inveigled herself into the affections of 67-year-old bank messenger Lee Judson, to whom she had not disclosed her past, and they got married soon after. Not long after beginning working for the Logans, she began telling neighbours that Arthur, who was 75, had fits of rage and physically attacked her and Margaret on several occasions. On the 1st of June, Margaret disappeared. 3 days later, Arthur was committed to Patton State Hospital with a court order obtained by Louise, who claimed to be his foster sister. Over the next few weeks, a series of friends and relatives visited or called at the Logan home and found that Margaret was not there. For any awkward questions, Louise had logical but slightly different answers. She spun her story around the fact that Margaret Logan did not want anyone to see her because of the disfiguring injuries she had received from her husband, claiming that Arthur had attacked his wife in a frenzy and bitten her nose severely. When Judson began asking his wife about Margaret's whereabouts, she reiterated that Arthur had attacked his wife and added that she was waiting in seclusion for plastic surgery. For the next 6 months, the newlywed couple continued living in the Logans' home. As she had with Denton, Louise began spending the Logans' money and forging their names on checks. In the meantime, Arthur Logan, bitterly believing his wife had callously left him to a dreary existence in the hospital, died alone on the 8th of December. Advised of his death, Louise ordered the authorities to turn over the body to medical research, in compliance with Mr. Logan's wish. Shortly after Arthur's death, employees at the Logan's bank detected one of the forgeries made and called the police. Neither of the Logans had been seen for nearly 7 months. Louise and her husband had been living there since June, having alterations and repairs made as though they owned the house. Every friend of the Logans had been told a different story to account for Margaret's absence. The police also discovered Arthur hadn't had a single visitor between June and December. It was soon after Arthur's death that federal employee Mrs. Wisebroad, reading a backlog of parole reports, noticed something strange about the June, July and August reports on Louise. She took them to her superior, Walter Lentz, chief investigator for the district attorney. He studied the handwriting carefully. "They're not the same," he said. "She's evidently signing them herself, and that's a violation of parole. By the way, what did she do time for?" "First-degree murder," was the reply. "She served 18 years for the Denton killing." Lentz promptly took the reports to District Attorney Fred Hauser, who, remembering the 1920 murder, assigned Homicide Chief Thad Brown to investigate. Brown's discreet inquiries among the Logan friends and neighbours convinced him the Denton murder had been duplicated. Come the 20th of that month, detectives arrived at the Logan house. It was 6 months after Margaret had disappeared that police discovered her decomposing body buried in a shallow grave under a tree in the backyard. Louise was arrested and charged with murder a few hours after the discovery. During questioning, it was claimed that Margaret was bludgeoned and shot by her husband during a homicidal frenzy. The suspect admitted that she buried the body, but denied killing her. She said she did not report the murder because she feared she would be blamed due to her previous conviction. An autopsy determined that Margaret had been shot in the back of the neck and had sustained a skull fracture. Louise and her husband were charged with murder, although the couple maintained their innocence. On January the 11th, 1945, the murder charge against Judson was dropped due to insufficient evidence, and he was released. The following day, he jumped to his death from the 9th floor of the Spring Arcade, an office building in Los Angeles. On learning of her husband's death, Louise wept and told reporters, "I'm to blame for that. He couldn't face disgrace. As long as I was associated with him, he was a marked man." After intense police interrogation, Louise made a statement 9 pages long, admitting burying Mrs. Logan's body. She denied she murdered Margaret, claiming that Arthur Logan in a fit of rage, had beaten and shot his wife to death. Positive no one would believe her because of the previous murder conviction, she decided that her only solution was to bury the body in a dresser drawer. Detectives had found a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, initialed EBL, the gun stolen from deceased parole officer Emily Latham. Crime lab technicians found blood traces and a bullet in the living room, which was enough evidence to reconstruct the murder. Mrs. Logan had been sitting near the telephone table when she was shot in the neck from behind. Autopsy surgeon Frank Webb, who had done similar duty in the Denton murder, announced Mrs. Logan had been beaten about the head with a blunt instrument, the blows being the immediate cause of death. At the coroner's inquest, Dr. Webb painted a graphic picture of how Mrs. Logan had been clubbed to death. The murder trial began in Los Angeles on April the 23rd, 1945. Prosecutors reckoned that Louise killed Margaret Logan to gain control of her finances after the two had an argument about a $200 forged check in Logan's name. There were 37 deadly parallels and similarities between the Denton and Logan murders. When Mrs. Logan, disillusioned at discovering Louise's true nature, sat down at the telephone to call the parole officer, realizing her life of luxury was endangered, the accused took the revolver and shot Logan in the back of the neck, in exactly the same spot she shot Jacob Denton 20 years before. Missing the spine, Louise took the gun and beat Mrs. Logan to death with repeated blows to the skull. The handle of the gun fitted the impressions in the skull exactly. The prosecution's force of evidence was highlighted when they introduced a transcript of the Denton trial to prove how similar the two killings were. On the 31st of May, the jury found Louise Peete guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to death. Her reaction was to say that death is merely an eventuality in all of our lives. During the intervening period following her conviction, Louise continued to maintain her innocence. After several failed appeals, she was executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison on the 11th of April, 1947.